Let us today start the composition scheme of GST, composition scheme of registration under GST. See, a businessman can get registered under normal system, or that businessman can also go for composition scheme of registration. We shall today discuss what is composition scheme and for whose benefit it is. Composition scheme is actually meant for helping the small businesses, is meant for giving benefit to the small businesses. So, what is composition scheme and what are the advantages and who can avail composition scheme, who cannot avail, all these things I will be discussing in this small video. So, let us first in one sentence tell what is composition scheme. Composition scheme is a very simple and easy scheme under GST for taxpayers. So, first thing they are saying composition scheme is a very easy and simple one, simple scheme, because there are lots of businessmen who cannot go for all formalities of maintaining books required for GST and all these things. So, they can go for composition scheme. Small taxpayers cannot get rid of tedious, GST formalities and pay tax at a fixed rate of turnover. So, it is for the small businessmen who can get rid of all tedious formalities of normal registration, normal payment of tax if they avail composition scheme. In fact, composition scheme is meant for small businesses only, and the scheme is opted by any taxpayer whose turnover is less than 1.5 crores. It was earlier different figure, but now it is maximum 1.5 crores, that is the amount of turnover. So, if anyone wants to go for composition scheme, that business can go for composition scheme only if the total turnover is less than 1.5 crore. So, a taxpayer whose turnover is below 1.5 crore can opt for composition scheme, but in case of northeastern states and Himachal Pradesh, the limit is now 75 lakh. As per CGST Amendment Act of 2018. Now, let me tell you, there are some businesses who cannot go for composition scheme. Let me give you some examples and you can find others from the book and from the, you can find it. So, who cannot opt for composition scheme? Number 1, manufacturer of ice cream, pan masala, tobacco. The people who manufacture ice cream, pan masala, tobacco, they cannot go for composition scheme. They do not get the advantage of composition scheme. A person making interstate supply, suppose a person is making interstate supply, the person is selling outside the state, that person cannot take the benefit of composition scheme. And if a person deals in exempt goods, exempt means the goods which are not under GST, then that goods are being dealt by the person, that person cannot go for composition scheme. Then a casual taxpayer, non-resident taxpayer, they cannot go for composition scheme. Then a person supplying services through e-commerce operator cannot go for composition scheme. A manufacturer of such goods and supplier of such services notified by the central government on the recommendation of GST Council. GST Council can recommend certain businesses or certain supplier who cannot go for composition scheme. Then central government will notify that these people cannot go for composition scheme. Now, what are the conditions? There are some conditions in composition scheme. This is very important. You have already learned about input tax credit. In composition scheme, no input tax credit can be claimed. That is the most important thing. And you know, the input tax credit is the most important point in GST. The tax which is already paid, then it can be adjusted. You know what is input tax credit? That benefit is not available in composition scheme. The dealer cannot supply goods not taxable under GST, such as alcohol. Suppose the dealer is supplying some goods which are not taxable under GST, like alcohol. If a dealer is dealing in alcohol also, along with his other trade, he cannot go for composition scheme, because alcohol is not under GST. There is no GST on alcohol. The taxpayer has to pay tax on normal rate of transaction under reverse charge mechanism. I will teach you later on what is reverse charge mechanism. But one more important point here, if a taxable person has different segments of business, Suppose more than one segment of business. For example, he is having textile, electronic, accessories, groceries, many things. So, all these businesses must be put together in one PAN number, must be put together to find the total turnover of 1.5 crore. So, they cannot do different business, different segment, they must put together. The taxpayer has to maintain the word composition taxable person at every notice and signboard. This is the most important thing. The taxpayer which is under composition scheme, they must mention in every document and notices that they are under composition scheme, because the businesses which are under composition scheme, they cannot take tax from customers. That is the most important thing. They cannot shift the burden. This is going against the principle of indirect tax. In composition scheme, whatever the businessman pays, they will bear it. They cannot take it from the whom? From the customers. The taxpayer has to mention composition taxpayer on every bill also. Whatever bill they make, in the bill they have to mention that we are under composition scheme. Means public should know that they are taking the benefit of composition scheme. They cannot cheat anybody. So, these are the points you have to remember. And how can a taxpayer opt for composition scheme? Taxpayer has to apply, has to file GST, COMP 02, like this forms they have to apply in the GST portal that they want to go for composition scheme. They have to apply for that, and then they will be going for composition scheme from normal scheme. How should a composition dealer raise bill? This is the point. See, a composition dealer cannot issue tax invoice. Most important point. Composition dealer themselves have to pay the tax. They cannot issue tax invoice. They cannot take the tax from the customers. So, this is because composition dealer cannot charge any tax from the customers. They need to pay the tax out of their own pocket. This is a very important point, because they cannot shift the burden. They have to take the burden, they have to pay, they have to take the burden. It is almost like direct tax. Hence, the dealer has to issue bill of supply. The dealer should mention composition taxable person not eligible to collect tax on supplies at the top of the bill of supply. When they make the bill of supply, at the top they have to write that we are under composition scheme, we are not eligible to collect tax. So, customer will know that this businessman cannot take tax from them. It should be clear. They cannot take tax from the customers. And you want to know the rate of composition scheme? Okay, just little bit I am telling you. In case of manufacturer and trader of goods only, it is CGST 0.5%, SGST 0.5% only. Total 1% you have to pay as composition tax, and no formality, nothing. And in case of restaurants not serving alcohol, restaurant is also a service organization, service type of, but there should not be alcohol. Then they can go for they can go for composition scheme. I have already told you, anybody dealing in alcohol cannot go for composition scheme. So, a restaurant which is not dealing with alcohol, they can go for composition scheme, and their rate of tax is total 5%, 2.5 for CGST, 2.5 for SGST, and other services, other service provider is 3% for SGST, 3% for CGST, and total it is 6%. So, this is the percentage of tax they have to pay, very nominal, very little, is good for the small businesses. This is actually created for the small businesses, to help the small businesses. So, you understand that. How should GST payment be made by a composition dealer? GST payment has to be made out of pocket. I have already told you, GST has to be paid by composition dealers on the following: GST on supplies made, tax on reverse, all these things. And what the return, what are the returns to be filed? See, this is a very important point. They have to pay the composition tax and they have to file the return also. And I am giving you some ideas when to pay the tax and when to file the return. I am giving you a little idea about it. A dealer is required to pay tax quarterly. Quarterly statement CMP means composition 08 by 18th of every month after the end of the quarter. After the quarter is over, means 3 months over, the next month before 18th of next month they have to pay the tax, this tax, and they have to pay return also. They have to pay return in GSTR 4. GSTR means GST return number 4. I will tell you about GST return later on also. A return in the form GST R4 has to be filed annually by 30 April next financial year. So, these are the things you have to remember, that they have to pay tax at this simple rate, very low rate, before 18th of the next month after the quarter, and they have to submit a return in GST R4 before 30 of April. And what are the advantages of composition scheme? Composition scheme advantages, 1 or 2 I am telling you. Number 1, less compliance. Compliance means formalities, very less formalities. Books of account need not be maintained, vouchers, issue of vouchers, invoices, very limited formality, very nominal, and limited tax liability. I have already told you. And then what are the disadvantages? There are some disadvantage also of composition tax. A limited territorial business. Composition scheme, when you do business in a national level, you cannot do it. It should be within the state. If it is beyond the state, you cannot take the benefit of composition scheme. It must be within the same state. A dealer is barred from carrying on interstate business. If you are under composition scheme, you cannot go for interstate business. You have to be within one state. Once your business is extended out of the state, then you have to come to normal tax GST, and no input tax credit on composition scheme, no input tax credit. Input tax credit is the most important factor in GST, but in composition scheme input tax credit is not there. You pay, you bear that much, and taxpayer will not be eligible to supply non-taxable goods under GST such as alcohol, etc., or e-commerce portal. They cannot go for e-commerce. Under composition scheme, you cannot do e-commerce business. You cannot deal with those goods which are not under GST, like alcohol. You cannot do this. Then you have to come to normal again, because alcohol is not under GST, and you cannot collect any tax from the customers. So, this is a very brief description of composition scheme of GST registration, and you please learn about composition scheme. And this is mainly meant for whom? Small businesses. Now, the maximum turnover is how much? 1.5 crore. You remember these things, but earlier when it first started, it was much less. Now, it is raised 1.5 crore, and in northeastern state in Himachal Pradesh, it is again 75 lakh. But overall, it is 1.5 crore. It is mainly for whom? For small businesses. There are some advantages, there are some disadvantages also, some restrictions also. You remember and you learn from the book again, and this is very simple, and I have talked to you very in a small way what is composition scheme of GST taxation. So, thank you, subscribe the channel, and meeting you next video. Thank you. Stay blessed always, stay happy always, and stay fit always.